My name is Terry Aukus. I'm an agronomy sales manager for CFE, and welcome to today's version of Field Friday. What I'd like to talk about today is we're going to be in a cover crop field and some scouting techniques and some other management practices on planting into a cover crop no-tilled field. So obviously by now I'm standing in a field that's soybeans have been emerged, and we get a lot of questions at CFE as cover crops tend to be more prevalent of how do I make sure I get a good stand no tilling into that. And typically you generally do not set your planter or drill much different than you would in a tilled field. Typically when I plant, I make sure that I'm probably just a little bit deeper just to account for the residue, the rows riding on the residue. But other in regards to that, I generally do not set the planter any deeper. We're standing in a soybean field that cover crop was aerial applied last fall. I believe it was actually last week of August. This spring, about middle of April, the winter rye was probably about 8 to 12 inches tall, and actually was a beautiful stand. It was burned down about the 18th of April, and this field was planted April 22. As you can see right now, if I didn't tell you that winter rye or a cover crop was planted, you wouldn't have guessed it. And that's a good thing. I think that means that we got a healthy soil, we got a lot of microbial and earthworm activity that's breaking the plant material down, and so that's a positive thing. You know, this grower wanted to get the benefit of helping break up compaction from last fall, since it was the last fall, and then kind of getting some extra ground cover to protect against those heavy early spring rains. And being now that the crop has emerged, the cover crop's done its thing and it's starting to break down. In regards to burning the cover crop down, one thing that's important, soybeans is extremely flexible. We've had growers burn it down a week or two before they want to plant, a couple days before they plant, after they plant. Soybeans are extremely versatile, and as long as you have a good planter with good row cleaners, I mean, that cover crop can be pretty tall, and we've seen very good results from that standpoint, which is actually a little bit different than corn. We cannot stress enough, it's very important to break the cover crop down, burn that down at least 2 weeks before you plant corn, if not 3. That would be ideal. I would not want to spray the cover crop dead after you plant corn or even after the crop emerges. I just would not want to do that. So we have an excellent stand in this field. Two things that I kind of wanted to stress on today as you're doing your crop scouting after you got everything planted. Two topics are voles and slugs. And so some of you might not know what those are, and if you're in a traditional tilled field, you may not see these two pests as often, but in a no-till, and especially a no-till with cover crop, you can have a tendency to see these pests a little bit more. There's not a lot you can do on them, but when you're scouting and you come across it, I just wanted to educate you today on what to look for. The first one is voles. Voles is a form of a field mouse that forages on green plant material. Typically you'll see them in waterways, ditches, and if you have a field that has cover crop, they'll feed on the cover crop because they're basically looking for plant material. And where they become a problem is when you terminate the cover crop and beans emerge, and the only thing left green in that field is soybeans, and voles will start feeding on the beans. The damage will typically, they'll be on the edges of the field or a little ways in, because like I said, they move from the ditch into the field. And when you go out, you'll see an area that they'll take most or any soybean in an area, maybe 30-foot circle, maybe a little bit larger. And if you go out there, they kind of, when they're rummaging through the plant material, it's kind of like a half-dug tunnel under the soil, but yet not completely under the ground, and you just see tunnels all over. That's just a typical vole damage. There's really not a lot you can do on it. Probably if you had a history of having some damage, the only thing that you really could do is just terminate that cover crop sooner than normal so that the cover crop dies and the beans haven't emerged yet, so that they basically move out. And the worst I've seen in 10 years in a field is maybe an 80 acres had 8-9 spots, like I said, in that 30 to 40 foot diameter, and other than that, that's probably the worst I've ever seen. But if you do come across that, that's what that is. That's a vole. The second one, probably a little bit more of a concern from my standpoint, is slugs. Slugs is related to the snail family, basically just doesn't have a shell. Slugs like no-till environments that are cool and damp. They really like cloudy environment, rainy environment, and we've had a tremendous cloudy start to this spring, so in my mind that was a little bit more of a concern. And they'll slither along the ground and plant material, and they'll feed on emerged beans, the cotyledons. They'll cut stems off, and they can cause some stand reduction. The best remedy is heat and sun. It dries them out. That's the best. Really, seed treatments, insecticides really don't have any bearing on them. Just kind of identifying the damage, and probably the best recommendation I would have, as some growers are looking at trying to save some costs and lowering seed populations on soybeans, just keeping in mind to have an adequate stand. If we're running way on the low end of a plant population and then you have some slug damage and emergence issues, we might fall then less than desirable stand that we want or want to end up with. So just keep that in mind, to kind of budget for that, and just pray for some nice warm sunny days. But if you see that, if seeing the plants that are cut off, and sometimes you typically, it's a quite easy pest because they don't move very fast. They'll be located on the stems and leaves. So that's just another thing to look for. Hopefully this spring has treated you well with the nice warm weather and the good growing conditions. As always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to contact any one of your CFE agronomists. Have a great day.